The Wyoming wind howled across the endless prairie like a lonesome wolf, carrying with it the fine dust that seemed to settle into every crack and crevice of the weathered ranch house. Jacob McAllister stood on his porch, squinting against the late afternoon sun that painted the grasslands in shades of amber and rust. His calloused hands gripped the wooden rail as he surveyed his domain, 3,000 acres of hard-won land that stretched to the horizon, where the sky met the earth in a wavering line of heat. It was 1882, and at 28, Jacob had already spent 10 years building this ranch from nothing but sweat and stubborn determination. The Double M brand was known throughout the territory for its quality cattle and honest dealings. Yet, for all his success, the house behind him echoed with a peculiar emptiness that no amount of hard work could fill. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out the letter that had arrived 2 weeks prior, its edges already soft from repeated handling. Reverend Thompson's neat script promised what Jacob had been praying for: a suitable wife, a woman of virtue and Christian upbringing from back east. Miss Sarah Whitfield, the letter read, comes from a respectable family in Philadelphia. She is 23 years of age, accomplished in all domestic arts, and eager to serve the Lord in the frontier territories. Jacob folded the letter carefully and returned it to his pocket. Tomorrow. The train would arrive in Cheyenne, 40 miles east, tomorrow. His life would change. He had already prepared the second bedroom, purchased new curtains from the general store, and even planted wildflowers along the front path, small touches that felt foreign to his bachelor ways but necessary for a lady's comfort. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew his attention. His foreman, old Pete, rode up on his gray mare, dust clouding around him like smoke. Pete had been with the Double M since the beginning, a grizzled veteran of countless cattle drives who knew the Wyoming territory like the lines on his weathered face. "Everything ready for the drive next month?" Jacob called out. Pete dismounted with a grunt, his joints protesting after a long day in the saddle. "Ready as we'll ever be, though I reckon you got other things on your mind than cattle prices in Denver." Jacob couldn't hide the slight color that rose to his cheeks. News traveled fast in the territory, and his impending marriage had been the talk of the ranch hands for days. "A man needs a helpmeet," Jacob said, echoing the words Reverend Thompson had used. "Someone to share the burdens and blessings the Lord provides." Pete spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Ain't arguing with that. Just hope this Eastern lady knows what she's getting into. Wyoming ain't no Philadelphia." As if to emphasize the point, a dust devil whirled across the yard, scattering the chickens and rattling the shutters. Jacob watched it dance away across the prairie, a brown specter against the endless grass. "She comes well recommended," Jacob said, though Pete's words had touched on his own private worries. What did he really know of this woman beyond a few lines in a letter? What did she know of him beyond what the Reverend had written? Their entire future hung on the thread of mutual faith and desperate hope. That evening, Jacob sat at his solitary supper of beans and salt pork, the kerosene lamp casting long shadows across the rough-hewn table. He had built this table with his own hands, just as he had built everything else on the ranch. Tomorrow, someone else would sit across from him. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. He opened his Bible to Proverbs, seeking comfort in familiar passages. "Who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is far above rubies." The words seemed to shimmer in the lamplight, full of promise. Jacob had lived by the book his entire life, finding in its pages the discipline and purpose that had driven him to success. Surely the Lord would not lead him astray in this most important decision. Outside, coyotes began their nightly chorus, their calls echoing across the vast darkness. Jacob closed the Bible and prepared for bed, his mind already racing ahead to tomorrow. He would wear his Sunday suit, the one he had ordered from the Sears catalog last year. His boots were already polished to a high shine, waiting by the door like soldiers at attention. As he lay in his narrow bed, staring at the ceiling beams he had hewn and placed himself, Jacob allowed himself to imagine what life might be like with a wife, someone to share the quiet evenings, to tend the garden he had always meant to plant, to fill the house with the sounds of life and laughter. Perhaps, in time, children, sons to carry on the Double M legacy, daughters to bring gentleness to this hard land. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows and moaning through the gaps in the walls. It was a sound he had grown accustomed to over the years, as familiar as his own breathing. But tomorrow, he thought, tomorrow there would be someone else to hear it with him, someone who would transform this house into a home, in town, 40 miles away. The railroad station was already buzzing with anticipation. The westbound train was due to arrive the next afternoon, bringing with it the usual assortment of settlers, speculators, and supplies. But this time, it would also bring the woman who would become Mrs. Jacob McAllister. The townspeople were already speculating. Mrs. Henderson at the general store had heard from Mrs. Patterson, who had heard from the Reverend's wife that the bride was a proper Eastern lady, educated and refined. The men at the saloon wondered aloud how such a delicate flower would fare in the harsh Wyoming territory, though they kept such thoughts away from Jacob's ears. He was known as a fair man, but not one to tolerate disrespect. As midnight approached and the ranch settled into sleep, only the wind remained awake, carrying with it the scent of sage and the promise of change. Somewhere to the east, a train carried its precious cargo through the darkness, each mile bringing Jacob's future closer to reality. He had built his life on faith and hard work, on the belief that righteousness would be rewarded and that the Lord's plan would unfold in its proper time. Tomorrow would test that faith in ways he couldn't yet imagine. For now, he slept, dreaming of a faceless woman in a proper Eastern dress, standing in his doorway with the sunset at her back, ready to share in the magnificent struggle of taming the Wild West. The prairie stretched endlessly under the star-filled sky, ancient and unchanging, indifferent to the hopes and fears of the humans who dared to call it home. And in a modest ranch house, a man prepared to gamble his carefully ordered life on a stranger's promise, armed with nothing but faith and the human need for companionship in a lonesome land. The train's whistle pierced the afternoon air like a knife through butter, announcing its arrival to the dusty town of Cheyenne. Jacob stood on the platform, his Sunday suit already damp with nervous sweat despite the dry heat. Around him, the usual chaos of arrival day unfolded, porters hauling luggage, merchants eyeing potential customers, and reunions both joyful and tearful. He clutched a small bouquet of prairie roses, their pink petals already wilting in the heat. His eyes scanned each window as the train groaned to a stop, searching for a modest Eastern lady in proper traveling attire. Steam hissed from the engine, momentarily obscuring his view, and when it cleared, passengers were already disembarking. An elderly couple descended first, followed by a traveling salesman with cases of goods. Then came a family with 3 children, and a group of cowboys heading for the stockyards. Jacob's heart hammered as he watched, waiting for Sarah Whitfield to appear. It was then that he saw her. She stepped onto the platform with the confidence of someone who had faced down worse things than a frontier town's scrutiny. Her dress, though dusty from travel, was a deep burgundy, not the modest gray or brown he had expected. Her dark hair, instead of being properly pinned beneath a bonnet, cascaded over her shoulders with only a few pins attempting to maintain propriety. But it was her eyes that caught him, green as prairie grass after rain, holding a defiance that made the crowd part before her. Behind her, whispers erupted like wildfire. "That's her," someone hissed. "Lizzie Daniels. Heard she was run out of Denver. Used to sing at the Golden Dollar Saloon," another voice added, among other things. Jacob felt the blood drain from his face. This couldn't be right. This woman with her bold dress and bolder gaze couldn't be the virtuous Sarah Whitfield. But she was walking straight toward him, a worn carpetbag in her hand and a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Mr. McAllister?" Her voice was husky, tinged with an accent that spoke of places far from Philadelphia's proper drawing rooms. "I believe you're expecting me." The prairie roses trembled in his hand. There must be some mistake. I'm waiting for Miss Sarah Whitfield." The woman's laugh was like whiskey, smooth and burning at the same time. "Oh, there's been a mistake, all right, but not the kind you're thinking." She reached into her bag and produced a letter, Reverend Thompson's letter, identical to the one in Jacob's pocket. "Seems your Reverend got his wires crossed. Sarah Whitfield went to marry a banker in California 2 months ago. I'm Elizabeth Daniels, and according to this letter, I'm your intended bride." The platform seemed to tilt beneath Jacob's feet. Around them, the townspeople pressed closer, eager for scandal. He could see Mrs. Henderson clutching her parcel, eyes wide with shock. Tom Bradley from the bank looked positively gleeful at Jacob's discomfort. "This is impossible," Jacob said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Reverend Thompson would never, wouldn't he? Elizabeth, Lizzie." The crowd had called her, tilted her head. "Maybe he thought you needed something different than what you asked for. Or maybe he just mixed up his correspondence. Either way, I sold everything I had and traveled 2,000 miles to get here." Her chin lifted slightly, though from the looks of things, I'm not exactly welcome. A group of young men near the saloon began to snicker. One of them, Jake Morrison, called out, "Hey, McAllister! Looks like you ordered a Sunday school teacher and got Saturday night instead." Heat flared in Jacob's chest, anger, embarrassment, and something else he couldn't name. The woman beside him stiffened but didn't lower her gaze. If anything, she stood straighter, as if the mockery was armor she had worn before. "Perhaps we should discuss this somewhere more private," Jacob managed, acutely aware of their audience. "Perhaps we should." She picked up her carpet bag with practiced ease. "Unless you're planning to send me back on the next train, though I should mention, I don't have the fare. Spent my last dollar getting here." Jacob looked at her then, really looked at her. Beneath the defiant exterior, he caught glimpses of something else: exhaustion, uncertainty, and a kind of desperate hope poorly concealed. Her dress, upon closer inspection, showed careful mending at the hem. Her boots were worn down at the heels. Whatever her past, her present was clearly one of limited means. "My wagon is this way," he heard himself say. The crowd parted as they walked through, whispers following in their wake like dust devils. Jacob kept his eyes straight ahead, the wilted roses still clutched in his hand. Beside him, Elizabeth moved with a grace that seemed at odds with her reputation, her head high despite the glares and gossip. At the wagon, he automatically moved to help her up, and she accepted with a nod of thanks. Her hand in his was work-roughened, not the soft palm of a pampered Eastern lady. As she settled onto the bench, she said quietly, "You can leave me at the boarding house if you prefer. I'll find work somehow." Jacob stood beside the wagon, torn between propriety and promise. He had given his word to marry whoever arrived on that train, had made a commitment before God and the Reverend. But this woman— "The letter said you were from a respectable Philadelphia family," he said finally. A bitter smile crossed her face. Once, my father was a clerk in a shipping firm. My mother took in sewing. Respectable enough until my father died and my mother got sick. Respectability doesn't pay doctor bills or put food on the table. And Denver? The saloon?" Her eyes met his steadily. "I'm not ashamed of surviving. Mr. McAllister, I've done what I had to do, and I've hurt no one but myself in the process. If that makes me unfit to be your wife, say so now." Jacob climbed onto the wagon seat, his movements automatic while his mind churned. As they pulled away from the station, he caught sight of their reflection in a store window, himself, rigid and proper in his Sunday suit, and beside him, a woman who looked like she had stepped out of one of those dime novels about the Wild West. "There's something else you should know," she said as they cleared the town limits. "The reason I had to leave Denver, I was married before, briefly, to a man who used his fists more than his words. I left him, ran away in the night like a thief, in the eyes of the law and the church. I'm still his wife." Jacob's hands tightened on the reins. The horses, sensing his tension, tossed their heads nervously. "You're still married?" "He's dead," she said flatly. Killed in a mining accident 3 months ago, but the damage to my reputation was already done. A woman who leaves her husband, whatever the reason, isn't welcome in polite society. They rode in silence for several miles, the prairie stretching endlessly before them. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the grasslands in shades of gold and crimson. Finally, Jacob spoke. "I made a promise," he said slowly. "To take as my wife whoever answered the advertisement. I'm a man of my word. Even if that woman is me." There was no self-pity in her voice, just curiosity. "I need time to think, to pray on it." He glanced at her sideways. "You can stay at the ranch tonight?" "Tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll decide what's to be done." She nodded, understanding more than he had said. As the Double M came into view, she straightened slightly. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "I can see why you're proud of it." Jacob looked at his ranch through her eyes, the solid house he had built, the well-maintained barns, the cattle dotting the distant pastures. It was his life's work, his pride, his fortress against the chaos of the world. And now he was bringing that chaos home with him. As they pulled up to the house, old Pete emerged from the barn, his eyes widening as he took in the woman beside Jacob. To his credit, he merely tipped his hat and took the horse's reins without comment, though Jacob could see the questions burning in his eyes. "Ma'am," Pete said simply. "Elizabeth Daniels," she replied, offering a smile that was both warm and wary. "Though most call me Lizzie." Inside the house, Jacob watched as she took in her surroundings, the simple furniture, the clean but sparse rooms, the Bible prominently displayed on the mantel. She moved to the window, looking out at the vast prairie beyond. "It's not what you expected," he said, not quite a question. She turned to face him, and for the first time since stepping off the train, her mask slipped. "Mr. McAllister, I stopped expecting anything the day I buried my mother. All I hope for now is a chance to prove that I'm more than my past mistakes." The prairie roses, forgotten until now, lay wilted on the table between them, a symbol of expectations already withering in the harsh light of reality. Outside, the wind began its evening song, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. The night was falling, and with it came the weight of decisions that would shape both their futures. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when the smell of smoke jerked Jacob from his restless sleep. He bolted upright, immediately alert to the acrid scent that every rancher feared more than wolves or rustlers. Through his window, he could see an orange glow painting the eastern sky, not the gentle light of dawn, but the angry flicker of fire. "Fire! Prairie fire!" Old Pete's voice rang out from the yard, followed by the clanging of the dinner bell used for emergencies. Jacob pulled on his clothes and boots in seconds, his mind already calculating wind direction and the location of the cattle. As he burst from his room, he nearly collided with Lizzie in the hallway. She was already dressed, her hair hastily pinned back, a determined look in her eyes. "Tell me what to do," she said simply. There was no time to argue about propriety or whether a woman should fight fires. "Wet every blanket and burlap sack you can find, stack them in the wagon, then fill every bucket and barrel with water from the well." She nodded and disappeared toward the kitchen while Jacob raced outside. The fire was moving fast, driven by the relentless Wyoming wind. Already, he could see the orange line eating through the dry grass, heading straight for the northern pasture where 50 head of cattle grazed. The ranch hands came running. Tom Sullivan, Ben Rodriguez, and young Charlie Watson, barely 16 but eager to prove himself. Pete was already hitching horses to the wagon, his movements swift despite his age. "Tom, Ben, get to the north pasture and move those cattle south toward the creek," Jacob ordered. "Charlie, help me plow a fire break. Pete, I'll get the water barrels," the old foreman finished, knowing the drill from years of experience. As the men scattered, Lizzie emerged from the house, her arms full of soaked blankets. Without being asked, she began loading them into the wagon with efficient movements. Her dress was already soaked through from the well water, clinging to her form. but she showed no sign of the delicate sensibilities Jacob had expected from an Eastern woman. "I've seen fires before," she said, catching his surprised look. "Colorado mining camps aren't known for their safety standards." Together, they worked to create a fire break, Jacob guiding the plow while Lizzie and Charlie cleared the larger brush and rocks from his path. The heat grew intense as the fire approached, the roar of flames mixing with the panicked lowing of cattle being driven to safety. Then the wind shifted. What had been a manageable threat suddenly became a monster. The fire jumped the half-finished fire break, sparks flying like deadly fireflies. A patch of grass near the barn caught, then another by the corral. "The barn!" Pete shouted. Without hesitation, Lizzie grabbed a wet blanket and ran toward the new flames, beating at them with fierce determination. Jacob watched in amazement as she worked alongside Pete, her movements sure and unafraid. This was not the delicate flower he had expected to marry, nor the saloon woman the town gossips had painted her to be. This was something else entirely, a woman forged by hardship into something as tough as the frontier itself. For hours they fought, sometimes gaining ground, sometimes losing it. Lizzie's face was streaked with soot and sweat. Her hands blistered from gripping the rough blankets, but she never faltered. When young Charlie nearly collapsed from smoke inhalation, she was there with water and a steady hand to guide him to clearer air. By noon, they had won. The fire, robbed of fuel by their fire breaks and beaten back by their efforts, finally died to smoldering embers. The damage was significant. 20 acres of good grazing land gone, a section of corral fence destroyed, but the house, barn, and most importantly, the cattle were safe. Jacob stood surveying the blackened landscape, his body aching with exhaustion. Beside him, Lizzie swayed slightly on her feet, and he instinctively reached out to steady her. "You should rest," he said. She shook her head. "The men need feeding. They can't work on empty stomachs." Despite her exhaustion, she headed toward the house, pausing only to pat Charlie on the shoulder and murmur words of praise for his bravery. An hour later, she had somehow produced a meal from the kitchen, simple but filling, beans and salt pork and cornbread, with strong coffee that tasted like heaven to the weary firefighters. The men ate gratefully, their initial wariness of her replaced by something approaching respect. "Ma'am," Tom Sullivan said, tipping his hat. "That was fine work out there. Not many women would have stood their ground like that." Lizzie's smile was tired but genuine. "Not many women have had to—" "Mr. Sullivan, but we do what needs doing, same as men." As the afternoon wore on and the men worked to repair the immediate damage, Jacob found himself watching Lizzie. She had changed into a simple calico dress, one of his late mother's he had kept stored away, and was tending to the burns and blisters on the men's hands with a gentle competence that spoke of experience. When she reached for his hands, he almost pulled back, then submitted to her ministrations. Her touch was gentle but sure she cleaned and wrapped his blistered palms. "You're not what I expected," he said quietly. She looked up at him, those green eyes holding depths he was only beginning to glimpse. "Expectations are dangerous things, Mr. McAllister. They blind us to what's really in front of us." That evening, after the hands had returned to the bunkhouse and Pete had made his final rounds, Jacob and Lizzie sat on the porch in exhausted silence. The smell of smoke still lingered in the air, a reminder of the day's battle. "Why did you really come here?" Jacob asked finally. "You could have stayed in Denver, found work somewhere else. Why answer a marriage advertisement?" Lizzie was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. "Have you ever been so lonely that the prairie wind sounds like it's calling your name? So tired of fighting alone that even a stranger's promise seems like salvation?" She turned to look at him. "I came because I wanted to belong somewhere again, to be more than Lizzie Daniels, the woman with a past. I wanted a chance to be someone's partner, to build something lasting." A bitter laugh escaped her, though I suppose that's just another expectation proved false. Jacob thought of his own loneliness, the empty chair across from him at every meal, the silence that pressed against the windows at night. He thought of the woman beside him, who had fought fire with the courage of any man and then tended wounds with the gentleness of a healer. Maybe, he said slowly, we both need to let go of our expectations. The moon rose full and bright, casting silver light across the scarred landscape. In the distance, a coyote howled, not the lonely sound of before, but a calling to its pack, a reminder that even in this harsh land, no creature was meant to survive alone. I'll need to go to town tomorrow, Lizzie said. Face down the gossips and get supplies. The men will need proper bandages, and the kitchen is running low on coffee. They won't be kind, Jacob warned. They never are. She stood, smoothing down the borrowed dress. But I've faced worse than unkind words. Mr. McAllister, and after today, I think I've earned the right to walk down Main Street with my head high. As she moved toward the door, Jacob found himself speaking. Jacob, just Jacob. She paused, a small smile playing at her lips. Good night, then, Jacob. He sat alone on the porch long after she had gone inside, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Everything had changed in the span of a day. The woman he had expected to marry was a phantom, a creation of misunderstanding and false assumptions. In her place was someone real, complicated, and unexpectedly strong. The burned prairie would grow back, he knew, often greener and healthier than before. Perhaps the same could be true for two damaged souls trying to find their way in a hard land. Perhaps expectations, once burned away, could make room for something better. As he finally headed to bed, Jacob noticed that Lizzie had left a lamp burning in the kitchen window, a small beacon against the vast darkness, a sign that someone was waiting, that the house was no longer empty. It was such a simple thing, but it made him pause, his throat tight with an emotion he couldn't name. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The town's gossips would have their field day. There would be more questions about propriety and reputation and what was fitting for a respectable rancher. But tonight, Jacob McAllister allowed himself to feel something he hadn't felt in years, a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, the fire that had threatened to destroy his ranch had instead cleared the ground for something new to grow. The fever struck Jacob 3 days after the fire, hitting with the sudden violence of a summer thunderstorm. One moment he was mending fence posts under the blazing sun. The next, he was on his knees in the dirt, his vision swimming and his body shaking with chills despite the heat. Pete found him there, half-conscious and muttering incoherently about cattle prices and fire breaks. The old foreman's weathered face creased with worry as he helped Jacob back to the house, practically carrying the younger man's weight. Lizzie! Pete called as they stumbled through the door. Need help here? She appeared from the kitchen, flour dusting her hands. But one look at Jacob's flushed face and glazed eyes had her moving swiftly. Get him to bed, she ordered, already reaching for his forehead. Lord, he's burning up. Pete, ride for Doc Morrison. Fast as you can. Doc's in Laramie till week's end, Pete said grimly. Won't be back for days. Lizzie's jaw tightened, but her voice remained steady. Then we handle this ourselves. Get him to bed. I'll need cold water, lots of it, and clean cloths. Check the medicine cabinet for willow bark, if there's none. Strip some from the trees by the creek. As Pete hurried off, Lizzie helped Jacob to his room. He was mumbling now, lost in fever dreams, calling out for his mother who'd been dead these 15 years. His strong body, usually so controlled and purposeful, shook with tremors he couldn't stop. Easy, Lizzie murmured, easing him onto the bed. I've got you. She worked with practiced efficiency, stripping off his sweat-soaked shirt and boots, covering him with a light sheet. When Pete returned with water and bark, she set about brewing a bitter tea, all the while keeping cold compresses on Jacob's burning skin. You've done this before, Pete observed, watching her work. More times than I care to remember, she replied, not taking her eyes off Jacob. Mining camps, saloons, fever spreads fast when folks live close together. Lost my mother to one like this? For 2 days and nights, she barely left his side. The fever raged on, sometimes breaking briefly only to return with renewed violence. Jacob tossed and turned, crying out in his delirium, revealing pieces of himself he'd never shared in his controlled, conscious state. "Papa, I tried," he moaned on the first night. "Tried to save the farm, but the bank. I'm sorry. Papa should have been stronger." Lizzie smoothed his damp hair back, her heart aching at the pain in his voice. She'd thought him born to privilege, this successful rancher with his biblical certainty. But here was a different story, a boy who'd lost everything and rebuilt his life through sheer will. On the second night, the fever peaked. Jacob's breathing became labored, his skin burning so hot that Lizzie feared for his life. She sent Charlie racing to town for more medical supplies, though she knew he'd face hostility trying to get them. "That woman wants medicine." She could imagine Mrs. Henderson saying, "Probably poisoned him herself." But Charlie returned with what she needed, along with unexpected news. "Mrs. Martinez from the boarding house sent this," he said, producing a bundle of herbs. "Said to tell you she remembers when you helped her daughter through the scarlet fever in Denver. Said these might help." Lizzie's eyes misted briefly. Kindness from unexpected quarters? Perhaps she wasn't as alone as she'd thought. Through the long night hours, she bathed Jacob's fevered skin, forced bitter tea between his lips, and talked to him in a low, steady voice. She told him about her childhood in Philadelphia, about the games she'd played in the narrow alleys, about her mother's gentle hands and her father's laughter before the consumption took him. "You have to fight," she whispered as dawn approached and his breathing grew more shallow. "You hear me? Jacob McAllister, you don't get to give up now. This ranch needs you. Your men need you." She paused, her voice dropping lower. "I need you," whether it was the medicine, her care, or simple stubborn will. The fever finally broke as the sun painted the eastern sky pink. Jacob's breathing eased, his skin cooling under her touch. He slept then, truly slept, for the first time in days. Lizzie slumped in the chair beside his bed, exhaustion hitting her like a physical blow. But she couldn't rest yet. There were chores to be done, men to feed, a ranch to keep running. She rose on unsteady legs, only to find Pete in the doorway. "You go wash up and rest a spell," he said firmly. "I'll sit with him. The men need breakfast. Tom's handling it. Man can fry bacon well enough." Pete's eyes were suspiciously bright. "You saved his life. Girl, don't think I don't know it. Now go rest before you collapse." She managed a few hours of sleep before worry drove her back to Jacob's room. He was awake, finally, his eyes clear though shadowed with exhaustion. Pete had helped him sit up against the pillows, and he was sipping water with shaky hands. When he saw her, something shifted in his expression. "You stayed." "Of course I stayed." She moved to check his forehead, relieved to find it cool. "The fever's broken, but you'll be weak for days. You need to rest. Eat when you can. Lizzie." His hand caught hers, stilling her fussing. "Pete told me. 2 days and nights. You could have left, gone to town, found other work. Why stay?" She looked at their joined hands, his so large and calloused from years of hard work, hers smaller but no less marked by life's demands. "You asked me once why I came here. I told you I wanted to belong somewhere, but that's only half the truth." She sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly unable to meet his eyes. "The whole truth is, I'm tired of running, tired of being alone. When I saw you that first day at the station, so rigid and proper and disapproving, I thought, here's another man who'll judge me by my worst moments. But then the fire came, and you worked beside me, trusted me, and these past days—" She trailed off, then forced herself to continue. "My first husband, he got fevers too, from the drink, mostly. I'd tend him, and he'd wake up meaner than before, blame me for his weakness. But you, even in your fever, you were gentle. Calling for your parents, worrying about the cattle, apologizing for things that weren't your fault. It told me more about who you really are than all your Bible reading and proper ways." Jacob was quiet for a long moment. Then, weakly, he squeezed her hand. "I saw my mother die of fever when I was 12. Watched my father sit by her bed for days. Helpless. He was never the same after. Lost the farm within a year. Died of a broken heart. I swore I'd never be that vulnerable. Never depend on anyone that way. And now I'm thinking that kind of strength might be its own weakness. He managed a faint smile. Seems the Lord has a sense of humor, sending me a teacher I never knew I needed. A knock at the door interrupted them. Charlie stood there, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable. Sorry to bother, but there's folks from town in the yard. They're saying, he glanced at Lizzie apologetically, they're saying unkind things. Sir, about Miss Lizzie and why you took sick. Jacob tried to rise, but Lizzie pressed him back. You're not going anywhere. She stood, smoothing her wrinkled dress. I'll handle this. Lizzie. But she was already gone, striding through the house with her chin high. Jacob could hear voices in the yard, ugly and accusing. Through his window, he could see a small crowd, Mrs. Henderson, Tom Bradley from the bank, even Reverend Thompson, looking deeply uncomfortable. Know what kind of woman she is. Mrs. Henderson was saying, no doubt she's bewitched him somehow. Proper ranch owner like Mr. McAllister, taken in by a fallen woman. Mrs. Henderson? Lizzie's voice cut through the venom like a blade. If you have concerns about Mr. McAllister's health, I'm happy to address them. He contracted fever after fighting to save this ranch, and by extension, the beef that stocks your husband's store. I've been nursing him with standard remedies any doctor would approve. As if we'd trust your word, Tom Bradley sneered. Everyone knows what you are. And what am I, Mr. Bradley? Lizzie stepped closer, and the banker actually took a step back. A woman who's worked honest jobs to survive, who's nursed sick folks through fevers, who fought fire alongside the men to save property and livestock. If that makes me fallen, then I'll wear that label with pride. From his window, Jacob watched in amazement as she faced down the crowd, her spine straight and her voice steady. This woman who'd been scorned and whispered about, who'd admitted to a past full of mistakes, stood like a queen before her accusers. The question is, Lizzie continued, what are you, people who rode 40 miles to spread gossip while a good man lay fighting for his life? Who'd rather trade in scandal than Christian charity? The Bible you all claim to follow has some strong words about casting stones. Reverend Thompson cleared his throat. Miss Daniels speaks truth. I've seen no evidence of wrongdoing here. Only a woman caring for a sick man with dedication any trained nurse would admire. Perhaps we should return to town and pray for Mr. McAllister's recovery instead of adding to his burdens. One by one, shamed by the Reverend's words and Lizzie's unwavering stance, the crowd dispersed. Only Mrs. Henderson lingered, her face twisted with frustrated malice. This isn't over, she hissed. Decent folks won't stand for decent folks, Lizzie interrupted. Are welcome at the Double M any time. You, Mrs. Henderson, are not. Good day. As the dust settled from the departing wagons, Lizzie stood alone in the yard, her shoulders finally sagging. Pete approached from the barn, admiration clear on his weathered face. That was something to see. He said quietly, They'll be back. Lizzie replied, Harder and meaner next time. Maybe so, but they'll find the Double M ready for them. Pete spit tobacco juice thoughtfully. The boss, he's a good man, best I've worked for. But he's been half alive these past years, going through the motions. Since you arrived, I've seen more life in him than in the whole decade before. Lizzie looked back at the house, where Jacob was undoubtedly fretting about not being able to defend her himself. He makes me want to be better than I've been, she admitted softly. Makes me believe maybe the past doesn't have to define the future. In this territory, Pete said, we judge folks by what they do, not what they've done. You've more than proved yourself. Miss Lizzie, don't let anyone tell you different. As she returned to the house, to Jacob's sick room and the mundane tasks of nursing, Lizzie felt something shift inside her chest. For the first time in years, she wasn't running or hiding or merely surviving. She was standing her ground, fighting for something worth keeping. and in his bed, weak but aware. Jacob McAllister realized that the woman he'd expected to marry, that phantom of propriety and religious virtue, could never have stood against that crowd with such fierce dignity. The real woman, with all her scars and strength, was worth a dozen proper ladies. The territory sun beat down on the Double M, relentless and purifying. Inside, two wounded souls began the slow work of healing, not just from fever, but from the deeper wounds that time and trust might finally mend. The storm came without warning on a September evening, rolling across the prairie like God's own fury. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in as many minutes, and the wind howled with a violence that made the sturdy ranch house groan and shudder. Lightning split the purple-black sky in jagged tears, each flash revealing the grass bent nearly horizontal by the gale. Jacob stood at the window, watching the storm's approach with the practiced eye of a man who'd learned to read nature's moods. He was fully recovered from his fever now, though Lizzie still fussed when he worked too long in the sun. Behind him. She moved about the main room, securing shutters and placing buckets under the spots where the roof was known to leak. "This'll be a bad one," he said, noting the greenish tinge to the clouds. "I've seen worse," Lizzie replied, but her voice held tension. Thunder crashed overhead, so loud it seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. They'd developed an easy rhythm over the past weeks, moving around each other with the comfortable familiarity of long partnership. Yet underneath ran a current of something unspoken, a tension that had nothing to do with storms or ranch work. Since his recovery, they'd maintained a careful distance, as if acknowledging what had passed between them during his illness would shatter some fragile understanding. The first drops of rain hit like bullets, driven horizontal by the wind. Within minutes, it became a solid wall of water. The lamplight flickered as drafts found every tiny gap in the walls. "We should check the barn," Jacob said, reaching for his oilcloth coat. "In this?" Lizzie looked at him incredulously. "You can't even see past the porch," as if to emphasize her point. A brilliant flash of lightning illuminated the yard, showing the barn door banging wildly in the wind. If it tore off, they'd lose half their winter feed to water damage. "I have to," Jacob said simply, pulling on the coat. "Then we go together." Lizzie was already reaching for an old coat of Pete's that hung by the door. "Don't argue. You'll need someone to hold the door while you secure it." He wanted to protest, to protect her from the storm's fury. But he'd learned over these weeks that Lizzie Daniels didn't need or want that kind of protection. She met challenges head-on, whether they were prairie fires, town gossips, or now this tempest. They plunged into the storm together, immediately soaked despite their coats. The rain was cold, shockingly so after the day's heat, and mixed with hail that stung exposed skin like wasps. They struggled across the yard, bent nearly double against the wind, hands clasped to keep from being separated in the blinding downpour. The barn door was indeed loose, one hinge torn partially free. Together they fought to close it, Jacob holding it in place while Lizzie wrestled with the wet rope to secure it. Lightning struck somewhere close, the thunder instantaneous and deafening. In that moment of brilliant illumination, Jacob saw her face, fierce with concentration, water streaming down her cheeks, that stubborn set to her jaw he'd come to admire. "Got it!" she shouted over the wind. They turned to head back, but the storm seemed to double its fury. The rain came in sheets now, turning the yard into a river, halfway to the house. Lizzie slipped in the mud, pulling Jacob down with her. They landed in a tangle of limbs, gasping and sputtering. For a moment they lay there, stunned. Then Lizzie began to laugh, not the bitter laugh he'd heard before, but something wild and free, the absurdity of it all. The very proper rancher and the scandalous woman, covered in mud and soaked to the bone, struck her as wonderfully ridiculous. Her laughter was infectious. Jacob found himself grinning, then chuckling, then laughing outright as rain poured over them. When was the last time he'd laughed like this? When had he last felt so utterly, recklessly alive? They helped each other up and staggered the rest of the way to the house, bursting through the door in a shower of water and mud. Safe inside. They stood dripping and breathless, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "We're making a terrible mess," Lizzie said softly. But she didn't move away. "Yes," Jacob agreed, his eyes not leaving hers. The storm raged outside, but inside, another kind of electricity filled the air. Lizzie's hair had come completely unpinned, hanging in wet ropes around her shoulders. Her dress clung to her form, and there was mud on her cheek. She'd never looked more beautiful to him. "Jacob," she whispered, and he realized he'd raised his hand to wipe the mud away. "We should get dry clothes," he said, his voice rough. "We should," she agreed, but neither moved. Thunder crashed again, and she flinched slightly, moving imperceptibly closer. That small motion broke his control. His hand cupped her cheek, thumb brushing away the mud, and she leaned into his touch with a soft sigh. "I've been trying to do the right thing," he said quietly. "Keep the proper distance, not take advantage. But Lizzie, Stop," she interrupted, placing a finger on his lips. "Stop thinking about what's proper and right and expected. For once in your life, Jacob McAllister, just feel." So he did. He pulled her against him and kissed her with all the pent-up longing of the past weeks. She responded with equal fervor, her arms winding around his neck, her body pressing close despite the wet clothes between them. The kiss was desperate and tender at once, tasting of rain and possibility. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Lizzie's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I shouldn't want this," she whispered. "I've made such mistakes before. Trusted the wrong men, believed pretty words. I swore I'd never—" "I'm not him," Jacob said firmly, understanding who she meant. "I would never hurt you, Lizzie. Never raise a hand to you or use you ill." "I know." She touched his face wonderingly. "That's what terrifies me. You're a good man. Jacob, the kind of man I never thought I'd find. And I'm the strongest, bravest woman I've ever known." He finished. "You think I care about your past? You fought fire beside me. You saved my life when the fever took me. You stood up to the whole town without flinching. Your past made you who you are, and who you are is—" He paused, searching for words. "Who you are is who I want." Lightning flashed again, illuminating her face, tears mixed with rainwater on her cheeks. "I'm not the godly woman you were expecting." "No," he agreed. "You're real. You're here. And you're making me realize that maybe what I thought I wanted was just another way of hiding from life." She kissed him then, softly this time, a promise rather than passion. When she pulled back, there was wonder in her eyes. "This is madness. We barely know each other." "We know enough," Jacob said. "We know how we work together in crisis. We know we can depend on each other. The rest we can learn as we go." The storm was beginning to pass, the thunder growing distant, the rain softening from a salt to patter. They stood in their puddle of water, holding each other, neither wanting to break the spell. "I should go change," Lizzie finally said. "And you need dry clothes before you catch another fever." "In a moment," Jacob murmured, pressing his forehead to hers. "Just give me a moment to believe this is real." She laughed softly. "It's real. Messy and improper and completely mad, but real." They parted reluctantly, each going to change. When they met again in the main room, dry and composed, something fundamental had shifted between them. The careful distance was gone, replaced by a new awareness. Every glance held heat, every accidental touch sparked like flint on steel. They sat by the fire, listening to the storm's retreat. Lizzie had made coffee, and they sipped it in companionable silence, sitting closer than propriety dictated on the worn settee. "The hands will talk," Jacob said eventually. "The town already gossips. This will add fuel to the fire." "Let them talk," Lizzie replied. "I've been the subject of worse gossip. At least this time it'll be true." He took her hand, marveling at how right it felt in his. "I want to court you properly. Do this right." "Jacob," she said gently, "nothing about us has been proper from the start. Why begin now?" "Because you deserve it," he said firmly. Because I want the world to know that I'm choosing you, not settling for you. Because—" He paused, then forged ahead. "Because I'm falling in love with you. And that's something worth doing, right?" Her breath caught. "You barely know me. When you learn all of it, all the ugly parts, then I'll love those too," he interrupted. "We've got time, Lizzie, all the time we need." Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the air clean and cool. The moon emerged from behind the clouds, painting the wet landscape in silver. It was a new world, washed clean, ready for whatever came next. "I should go to my room," Lizzie said, though she made no move to leave. "You should," Jacob agreed, equally still. They sat there, hands entwined, watching the fire burn low. Neither moved until the first pink light of dawn touched the windows, and even then, it was with reluctance. They'd crossed a line in the storm, moved from careful cooperation to something deeper and more dangerous. As Lizzie finally rose to begin the day's chores, she paused at the door. "Jacob, I'm falling too, just so you know." He smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "That's good to know. Miss Daniels." "Very good to know." The storm had passed, but it had left change in its wake. The careful dance was over. Now came the harder part, building something lasting from the foundation of passion and understanding they'd discovered in the wind and rain. But as the sun rose over the Double M, painting the rain-washed world in gold, both felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Word of the storm night spread through the territory faster than wildfire. Perhaps Pete had mentioned seeing them return to the house together, soaked and laughing. Perhaps the hands had noticed the new ease between them, the lingering glances and almost touches. Whatever the source. By week's end, the gossips had their teeth in a fresh scandal. It started with whispers at the general store, escalated to bold pronouncements at the church social, and reached its peak when Mrs. Henderson organized what she called a Christian intervention, a delegation of proper citizens determined to save Jacob McAllister from the clutches of a fallen woman. But they hadn't counted on Frank Garrett. Garrett rode into the Double M on a Tuesday afternoon, just as Lizzie was hanging a wash on the line. Jacob was in the far pasture with Tom and Ben, checking the herd before the fall drive. She heard the horse before she saw the rider, and something in the arrogant clip-clop of hooves on hard-packed earth made her stomach tighten. He dismounted with the easy grace of a man comfortable with violence, his dark suit and silver-studded gun belt marking him as someone who made his living in shadows. But it was his smile that made her blood run cold, the same smile that had once charmed her, then terrorized her, in what seemed like another lifetime. "Hello, Lizzie," Frank said, tipping his hat mockingly. "Fancy finding you here, playing house with a rancher." Her hand stilled on the wet sheet. "Frank, I heard you were dead." Disappointed? He stepped closer, and she fought the urge to retreat. "That was my partner got killed in that mining accident. Though I'll admit, I encouraged the confusion, made it easier to pursue other opportunities without a wife dragging me down. We're nothing to each other now," Lizzie said, forcing her voice steady. "Whatever we had ended the night you broke my ribs." His face darkened. "Funny thing about marriage vows, sweetheart. Till death do us part, and as you can see, I'm very much alive. What do you want? Well now, that depends." He glanced around the ranch with calculating eyes. "Nice spread your ranchers got here. Profitable. From what I hear, seems only fair I should get my share, seeing as you're my legal property and all." "I'm nobody's property," Lizzie spat. Frank moved faster than a striking snake, grabbing her wrist and twisting until she gasped. "You always did have too much mouth on you. Thought I'd taught you better, but seems you need reminding. Let her go." The voice was quiet, but carried the weight of barely leashed fury. Old Pete stood 10 feet away, his weathered hand resting on the Colt at his hip. Behind him, Charlie held a rifle with shaking but determined hands. Frank released Lizzie's wrist slowly, his smile never wavering. "No need for unpleasantness. Gentlemen, Just having a conversation with my wife. The lady asked you to leave. Pete said, I'm asking a mite less polite. The lady? Frank laughed. Is that what she's calling herself now? Let me tell you what your lady really is. The sound of approaching horses cut him off. Jacob rode into the yard, took in the scene. Lizzie's pale face, the marks already forming on her wrist, the stranger's predatory stance, and dismounted in one fluid motion. You'd be Frank Garrett, he said. It wasn't a question. And you'd be the fool who thinks he's getting my leavings, Frank replied. Though I'll admit, she's held up well. Still got that fire that needs taming. Jacob's fist connected with Frank's jaw before anyone saw him move. The man staggered but didn't fall. Coming up with his hand reaching for his gun. 3 rifles cocked simultaneously. Pete's, Charlie's, and Tom's from where he'd positioned himself by the barn. I'd think real careful about that next move. Pete drawled. Frank froze, then slowly raised his hands. Blood trickled from his split lip. Defending a woman's dubious honor? How noble. Tell me, McAllister, does she still make those little sounds when you— This time Jacob's blow sent him sprawling in the dust. Lizzie grabbed Jacob's arm before he could follow up, her touch instantly calming his rage. He's not worth it, she said quietly. He's nothing but talk and cruelty. Frank struggled to his feet, no longer smiling. This isn't over. I've got legal claim to her and any property she's acquired. I'll be back with the sheriff and proper papers. We'll see how tough you all are then. He mounted his horse with as much dignity as he could muster and rode off, but not before calling back. Enjoy her while you can. McAllister, I've already had the best years. The yard fell silent except for the sound of Lizzie's measured breathing. She stood rigid, arms wrapped around herself. The strong woman Jacob knew temporarily replaced by someone younger and more frightened. Lizzie, he said gently, I need a moment. She fled to the house, leaving the men standing awkwardly in the yard. Want us to follow him, boss? Tom asked. Make sure he leaves the territory. Jacob was tempted, powerfully tempted, but shook his head. He'll be back with the law, just like he said. We need to be ready. That evening, Jacob found Lizzie in the kitchen, mechanically preparing supper. Her movements were precise but lifeless, all the warmth drained from her. Talk to me, he said. She set down the knife carefully. He's right, legally, I'm still his wife. When I ran, I became a fugitive. He could claim abandonment, demand I return or face jail. Any property I've acquired, including wages earned, belongs to him by law. Wyoming territory has different laws than Colorado. Jacob said, women have more rights here. Not enough to overcome a legal marriage? She turned to face him, and the defeat in her eyes broke his heart. I've brought this trouble to your door. I should leave tonight. Lead him away from here. Don't you dare! Jacob crossed the space between them, gripping her shoulders. You think I'd let you face him alone? After what you mean to me? What I mean to you will be your ruin, she said bitterly. The town already talks. Now they'll have proof of what I am. A runaway wife, an adulteress in the eyes of the law. Your reputation can go to hell, Jacob finished. Lizzie, I need you to hear me. You are not property. You are not defined by a cruel man's legal claim. You are the woman who fought fire beside me, who saved my life, who makes me want to be better than I am. I will not let him take you. She searched his face. You can't fight the law, Jacob. Watch me. The next morning brought what Lizzie had dreaded. Frank returned with Sheriff Coleman, a man who owed his election to the proper citizens of the town, citizens like Mrs. Henderson, who accompanied them with barely concealed glee. Mr. McAllister, the sheriff said uncomfortably. He'd bought cattle from the Double M and respected Jacob. But the law was the law. Mr. Garrett here has shown me marriage papers. Says his wife is living on your property without his permission. My property, my choice who lives here, Jacob replied evenly. Now, you know it ain't that simple. Coleman said, a man's got rights to his wife. If Mrs. Garrett won't come willing. I'm obligated to— Miss Daniels. Jacob interrupted. Her name is Miss Daniels, and she's under my protection as my intended bride. The words rang across the yard like a gunshot. Lizzie's eyes widened. Frank's face darkened. And Mrs. Henderson gasped in outraged delight. "You can't marry another man's wife," she exclaimed. "I can if that man is dead," Jacob said calmly, which, according to the death certificate from the Denver Mining Authority, Frank Garrett died 3 months ago in a cave-in. Tragic loss. He produced a paper from his pocket, the same certificate Lizzie had shown him weeks ago, when she'd thought Frank dead. "This makes Miss Daniels a widow, free to remarry as she chooses." Frank sputtered. "That's a mistake. I'm standing right here." "Are you?" Jacob asked mildly. "Because the man I see is a stranger trying to claim a dead man's wife. Unless you have proof you're Frank Garrett, and if you are, I'd wonder why you let your wife believe you dead, why you abandoned her for months. Sounds like desertion to me." Sheriff Coleman studied the certificate, clearly relieved to find a way out. "Well now, this does complicate things. Man can't have claim on a wife if he's legally dead." "This is fraud," Frank shouted. "I'll get lawyers, witnesses." "You do that," Jacob said. "Meanwhile, you're trespassing on my land. Sheriff, I'd appreciate it if you'd escort this stranger off my property." Coleman nodded slowly. "Seems reasonable. Come on, mister. You can sort this out with a judge if you've a mind to." As they prepared to leave, Frank locked eyes with Lizzie. "This isn't over, darling. One way or another, you'll pay for running out on me." "Mr. Garrett," Jacob said quietly, but with steel in his voice. "If you come near her again, if you so much as look at her wrong, I'll kill you. That's not a threat. It's a promise before God and these witnesses. Are we clear?" Frank's hand twitched toward his gun, but Pete and the hands still had rifles trained on him. After a long moment, he spat in the dust and turned his horse. As the group rode away, Mrs. Henderson lingering to shoot poisonous glares. Lizzie sagged against Jacob. "A death certificate won't stop him." "No," Jacob agreed. "But it bought us time, and publicly declaring our engagement means the town knows where I stand. Your reputation will survive, or it won't, and I'll build a new one." He tilted her chin up. "I meant what I said. My intended bride, if you'll have me, not because of Frank Garrett or the gossips, but because I love you." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Jacob, A shot rang out, splintering wood inches from where they stood. Frank had circled back, approaching from the cover of the cottonwoods. His second shot would have found its mark if Pete hadn't shoved them aside, taking the bullet in his shoulder. The yard erupted in gunfire. Tom and Charlie returned fire while Ben dragged Pete to cover. Jacob pushed Lizzie behind the water trough, then grabbed his own rifle from where it leaned against the porch. The battle was brief, but vicious. Frank had the cover of trees, but was outnumbered. When the smoke cleared, he lay still in the dust, his silver-studded gun belt gleaming in the sun. Sheriff Coleman, who'd heard the shots and returned, looked down at the body with resignation. "Self-defense, clear as day. Man drew on you first. Plenty of witnesses." He glanced at Lizzie. "Seems you're a widow for real this time, ma'am." As Doc Morrison tended Pete's shoulder, painful but not serious, Lizzie stood over Frank's body. Jacob joined her, uncertain what she was feeling. "He was charming once," she said quietly. "Told me pretty lies I wanted to believe. Then the drinking started, and the jealousy, and the fists." She looked up at Jacob. "I'm not sorry he's dead. Does that make me wicked?" "It makes you human," Jacob said, pulling her close. "And honest. And free." That evening, as Pete rested comfortably and the hands celebrated their victory at the bunkhouse, Jacob and Lizzie sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of redemption. "So," Lizzie said eventually, "your intended bride?" "If you'll have me," Jacob repeated. "Though I understand if you need time." She silenced him with a kiss, soft and sure. "I've had years of time. Jacob, years of running and hiding and being afraid. I don't need more time. I need you. The stars emerged one by one, ancient witnesses to another chapter in the endless story of the frontier. And on the Double M Ranch, two souls who'd found each other against all odds began to plan a future neither had dared dream of. A future built on truth, tested by fire, and strong enough to weather any storm. The drought began subtly, the way most disasters do. First, the morning dew disappeared, leaving the grass dry and brittle underfoot. Then the afternoon thunderheads that usually built over the mountains stopped coming. By the third week without rain, even the eternal optimists among the ranch hands had stopped looking hopefully at the cloudless sky. Jacob stood at the edge of what had been their best grazing pasture, now a sea of brown stubble that crunched beneath his boots. The cattle had stripped it bare, and what they hadn't eaten had withered in the relentless sun. In the distance, he could see the herd clustered around the creek, which ran lower each day. "We'll have to move them to the north pasture soon," Pete said, riding up beside him. His shoulder had healed well from the gunshot, though he still favored it on cold mornings. "But that won't last long neither if this keeps up. How's the well holding?" "Still producing, but the water table's dropping. Tom says the Henderson place already lost their shallow well." Jacob removed his hat, wiping sweat from his brow. The sun seemed to hang malevolently overhead, a brass coin in a white-hot sky. "We'll need to dig irrigation ditches from the creek while there's still water to channel. The hands won't like it," Pete warned. "Digging ditches in this heat is brutal work. They'll like starving come winter even less." Jacob replied grimly. Back at the house, he found Lizzie in the root cellar, carefully rationing their water supplies. She'd adapted to ranch life with remarkable speed, her practical nature serving her well. Their engagement had been the talk of the territory for weeks, but she'd weathered the gossip with her chin high and her hand steady. "How bad is it?" she asked, reading the worry in his face. "Bad enough. We need to start preparing for the worst." He explained about the irrigation ditches, the failing wells across the county. "If this drought continues, we could lose half the herd, maybe more." She nodded, already thinking ahead. "I'll organize the women from the neighboring ranches. We can share information about which wells are still good, coordinate water usage. Mrs. Martinez mentioned her grandmother knew ways to find water even in dry years, divining rods and such. The church folk won't like you organizing with the Mexican families," Jacob warned. "The church folk can drink dust, then." Lizzie replied tartly, "Drought doesn't care about the color of your skin or the language you speak." Despite the dire circumstances, Jacob smiled. This was the woman he'd fallen in love with. Fierce, practical, and unafraid to challenge convention when lives were at stake. The next weeks tested everyone on the Double M. They dug ditches in the pre-dawn darkness and the evening twilight, avoiding the killing heat of midday. Even so, the sun was merciless, baking the earth until it was hard as stone. Shovels rang against the ground like bells, and progress was measured in inches. Lizzie worked alongside the men, her skirts tied up and her sleeves rolled back, wielding a shovel with the same determination she brought to everything. When Charlie collapsed from heat exhaustion, she was there with water and wet cloths, ordering him into the shade with an authority no one questioned. "You shouldn't be out here," Jacob said one evening, watching her wrap bloody blisters on her palms. "Neither should you. Yet here we are." She flexed her fingers experimentally. "I've had worse. At least these wounds are earned honest, fighting for something worthwhile." As the drought deepened, tensions rose throughout the territory. Water rights became fighting matters. The Hendersons accused the Martinez family of stealing water from the creek that ran between their properties. The Baker brothers got into a shootout over a disputed well. Fear made neighbors into enemies. Christian charity withering like the grass. Then came the day the creek stopped running. Ben brought the news, riding hard from the north pasture. "It's down to a trickle. Boss, by tomorrow, it'll be mud." Jacob closed his eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility crushed down on him. Without the creek, they had only the wells, and those were failing across the county. The cattle would start dying within days. We could drive them north, Tom suggested. Head for the mountains where there's still snow melt. That's 300 miles through drought country. Pete countered. We'd lose half of them on the way. We'll lose all of them if we stay. Tom argued. As the men debated, Lizzie slipped away. Jacob found her an hour later, kneeling in what had been her kitchen garden, handful of dead plants crumbling in her fingers. I tried so hard, she said quietly. Watered them with dishwater, covered them from the worst sun, but it wasn't enough. He knelt beside her. You did everything you could. Did I? She looked at him with anguished eyes. Sometimes I wonder if this is punishment, for my past, for the choices I made. Maybe I don't deserve a new life. A fresh start. Stop that, Jacob said firmly, taking her shoulders. This drought isn't about deserving. It's about survival. And if anyone knows how to survive, it's you. She leaned into him, drawing strength from his presence. What are we going to do? Whatever it takes, he said. Together. That night, Lizzie had an idea. The old Paiute man who sells herbs in town, Running Wolf. He told Mrs. Martinez his people know where the old springs are, the ones that never fail. Sacred places. The tribe doesn't trust ranchers, Jacob said. We've taken too much from them already. They might trust me, Lizzie said thoughtfully. I'm an outsider too, someone who knows what it's like to be judged and found wanting. It was a slim hope, but they were down to slim hopes. The next morning, Lizzie rode to the Paiute camp, bringing what medicine they could spare and a humble request for help. She returned at sunset with Running Wolf and 2 younger men. The old man's face was carved by years and weather into something timeless. He studied Jacob with dark, knowing eyes. Your woman says you are a fair man, Running Wolf said, that you treat all with respect. This is rare among your kind. I try to be, Jacob replied simply. Trying is a beginning. The old man gazed out at the dying land. There is a spring, hidden, sacred to my people. We have guarded its secret through many droughts. But the earth is angry now, and all her children suffer together. He agreed to show them the spring on 2 conditions: that they share the water with all who needed it, regardless of race or standing, and that they protect the sacred site from desecration. You have my word, Jacob said, and meant it. The spring was a 2-day ride into the Badlands, hidden in a box canyon that looked like nothing but more desert. But Running Wolf led them through a narrow crack in the rocks, and there it was, water bubbling up from deep in the earth, feeding a pool shaded by ancient cottonwoods. This water comes from the heart of the earth, Running Wolf explained. It will not fail unless the earth herself dies. They organized the water drives carefully. Every family in the territory could send wagons, but only what they needed to survive. Lizzie coordinated the efforts, her past as a fallen woman suddenly less important than her gift for organization and fairness. Mrs. Henderson arrived on the 3rd day, her wagons empty but her pride preventing her from asking. Lizzie met her at the canyon entrance. I believe you're here for water, Mrs. Henderson, Lizzie said calmly. 3 barrels should see your family through the week. The older woman's face worked through several emotions before settling on reluctant gratitude. Thank you, Miss Daniels. We all do what we must to survive, Lizzie replied. Today you need water. Tomorrow I might need something only you can provide. That's how we survive out here, together. The drought lasted 2 more months. They lost cattle, despite their best efforts. The land looked like the moon's surface, cracked and barren, but the people survived, bound together by necessity and the sacred spring. When the rains finally came, it was like a biblical deluge. The sky opened up and poured out all the water it had been hoarding. People stood in their yards, faces raised to the sky, laughing and crying at once. Jacob found Lizzie standing in the rain, her arms spread wide, letting it soak through her clothes. He joined her, pulling her into his arms as water streamed over them both. We made it, she said against his chest. Together, he agreed, just like we promised. The next morning, tender green shoots appeared in the most unlikely places, life returning to what had seemed dead forever. At the Sunday service, Reverend Thompson spoke about faith in dark times and the importance of community. For the first time, no one looked askance when Lizzie entered the church on Jacob's arm. Funny how drought makes everyone equal, Pete observed later, watching the neighboring families work together to repair damaged irrigation systems. Not funny, Lizzie corrected. Human. It takes disaster to remind us what really matters. As she spoke, she absently rubbed her belly, where new life was just beginning to grow, a secret she'd share with Jacob that evening. The drought had tested them, nearly broken them, but they'd emerged stronger. The land would recover, richer for its trial by fire and drought. Standing on the porch that evening, watching the sunset paint the rain-washed world in brilliant colors, Jacob pulled Lizzie close. Ready for whatever comes next? She smiled, thinking of the child growing within her, of the community forged in crisis, of the love that had bloomed in the most unlikely ground. With you, always. The Double M had survived its greatest test, and in the process, something new had been born, not just between Jacob and Lizzie, but in the entire territory. The drought had burned away more than grass. It had burned away pretense and prejudice, leaving room for new growth. And grow it would, as surely as the rains followed drought, as surely as love found a way to flourish even in the harshest ground. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, with the kind of crystalline Wyoming sky that made a person believe in fresh starts. The drought had broken 2 months ago, and the prairie bloomed with wildflowers, as if the earth itself celebrated the union about to take place. Jacob stood before the small mirror in his room, fumbling with his collar, his hands, so sure when working rope or branding iron, trembled slightly as he adjusted his new black coat. Through the window, he could see neighbors arriving, ranchers and townspeople, Mexican vaqueros and Paiute families, all gathering in the meadow where they'd set up rough benches and decorated with prairie roses. "Never seen you nervous about anything," Pete observed from the doorway, looking uncomfortable in his own Sunday clothes. "Starting to worry now?" "Not about marrying her," Jacob said firmly. "Just want it to be right. Want her to have the wedding she deserves." Pete snorted. "That woman would marry you in a barn during a blizzard and count herself lucky. She don't need fancy." "Maybe not," Jacob agreed. "But she's getting it anyway." In the house, Lizzie sat before her own mirror as Mrs. Martinez and her daughters helped with the final touches. The dress had been a community effort. Mrs. Baker contributing lace from her own wedding dress. The Mexican women embroidering delicate flowers along the hem. Even Mrs. Henderson quietly leaving a pair of pearl earrings on Lizzie's doorstep with a note, "Every bride should have something borrowed. You look beautiful. Mija," Mrs. Martinez said, stepping back to admire their work. "Like an angel." Lizzie laughed, the sound bright with joy and nerves. An angel with a scandalous past and calloused hands. An angel who saved us during the drought. Maria, the eldest Martinez daughter, corrected, who brought us all together, who showed us what real strength looks like. Through the window, Lizzie could see the gathering crowd. Just months ago, many of these people had whispered behind their hands about her, had judged her unworthy. Now they came to celebrate, brought together by shared hardship and mutual respect. "It's time," Mrs. Martinez announced. Tom Sullivan waited outside with a wagon decorated with ribbons and flowers. He helped Lizzie up with exaggerated care, grinning at her eye roll. "Can't have the boss getting mad at me for jostling his bride," he explained. The short ride to the meadow felt both eternal and instant. Then the wagon stopped. The small band of musicians, cowboys with fiddles and guitars, joined by Mexican guitarreros, struck up a melody, and Lizzie stepped down to face her future. Jacob waited at the far end of the aisle, created by the benches, Reverend Thompson beside him with an open Bible. But it was Jacob's face that held Lizzie's attention, the wonder in his eyes, the love written plain for all to see. Old Pete offered his arm. "Figured you might need someone to give you away proper-like." he said gruffly. "If you'll have me." "I'd be honored," Lizzie whispered, blinking back tears. They walked slowly down the aisle, past faces that had become familiar over the months. Charlie blushing and grinning. Ben and Tom standing straight and proud. Running Wolf nodding solemnly. The Martinez girls scattering flower petals. Even Sheriff Coleman had come, tipping his hat respectfully. When they reached Jacob, Pete placed Lizzie's hand in his with careful ceremony. "You take care of her," he said quietly. "She's one of the good ones." "I know," Jacob replied, never taking his eyes off his bride. "Believe me, I know." Reverend Thompson cleared his throat. "Dearly beloved, we gather today in the sight of God and this company to witness something remarkable. Not just the union of two people, but the triumph of love over adversity, of hope over despair." He spoke of love that endures all things, of partnership forged in trial, of the mysterious ways God brings souls together. Lizzie heard the words dimly, lost in Jacob's steady gaze, in the warmth of his hands holding hers. "The rings," Thompson prompted. Charlie stepped forward, nearly dropping the simple gold bands in his nervousness. The gathering chuckled warmly as he recovered, presenting them with exaggerated care. As Jacob slipped the ring on her finger, he spoke the words he'd prepared. "With this ring, I wed you. Lizzie Daniels, not the woman I expected, but the woman I needed, my partner in drought and plenty, in fire and storm, my love, today and always." Lizzie's voice was steady despite her tears. "With this ring, I wed you, Jacob McAllister, the man who saw past my mistakes to my heart, who gave me a home when I had none, hope when I had lost it, my anchor, my love, my future." "By the power vested in me," Thompson declared, his own voice suspiciously thick. "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Jacob, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was tender and sure, a promise sealed before witnesses. The crowd erupted in cheers, whoops from the cowboys, musical cries from the Mexican families, even dignified applause from the town's proper citizens. The celebration that followed was unlike anything the territory had seen. Tables groaned under the weight of shared food. American beef and beans alongside Mexican tamales and native fry bread. The musicians played everything from frontier ballads to Spanish love songs, and dancing broke out spontaneously, mixing traditions and steps in joyful chaos. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Jacob and Lizzie managed to slip away to a quiet spot overlooking the valley. The Double M spread out before them, green now with new growth. "No regrets?" Lizzie asked, leaning into his embrace. "Only that it took so long to find you," Jacob replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. She turned in his arms, her hand resting on the slight swell of her belly that her dress cleverly concealed. "About that, we might not be alone much longer." Jacob's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Lizzie, are you 3 months along, near as Doc Morrison can figure?" She watched his face anxiously. "I wanted to tell you before, but with the wedding planning and—" He silenced her with a kiss that left them both breathless. "A baby," he said wonderingly. Our baby," she confirmed, laughing at his dazed expression. "Born to the Double M, with the stubbornness of both parents and the whole territory for family." As if summoned by the mention of family, Pete appeared around a boulder, looking sheepish. "Sorry to interrupt, but folks are asking after you. Something about cutting the cake?" They returned to find the celebration still in full swing. The cake, a marvel of engineering by the combined efforts of several ranch wives, stood ready. Together, they cut the first piece as tradition demanded, feeding each other with laughter and only minimal cake casualties. As full dark fell and lanterns were lit, creating circles of golden light in the prairie darkness, Reverend Thompson called for quiet. "Before this blessed day ends, the bride and groom have asked me to share something with you all." Jacob stepped forward, Lizzie at his side. "During the drought, we all learned what it means to depend on each other. We want to make that permanent. Starting next month, the Double M will host a monthly gathering, a chance for all families, regardless of background, to come together, share meals, share problems, share solutions. We're calling it the Territory Table, Lizzie added, because this territory belongs to all of us, and we're stronger together than apart. Running Wolf stood, his weathered face creased in a rare smile. The spring that saved us flows still. Let it remind us that beneath our different colors and tongues, we draw from the same source. This union today shows the way forward. One by one, others stood to speak. Words of blessing, promises of cooperation, acknowledgments of change. Mrs. Henderson, her voice stiff but sincere, offered to teach sewing to any who wanted to learn. Mrs. Martinez announced she would share her grandmother's knowledge of medicinal herbs. The barriers that had seemed so solid were crumbling like drought-baked earth in the rain. As the evening wound down and guests began to drift away, many pausing to embrace the newlyweds, Jacob and Lizzie stood together in the lantern light. Their wedding had become more than a personal celebration. It was a covenant for the entire territory, a promise of new beginnings. Later, alone at last in their home, they stood at the window watching the last wagon lights disappear into the darkness. Not the wedding you expected when you sent for a proper Eastern bride, Lizzie observed. No, Jacob agreed, pulling her close. It was better. It was real. Outside, coyotes called across the prairie, their songs no longer lonely, but part of the night's music. Inside, two hearts beat as one, soon to be three, in a house that had become a home, on a ranch that had become a symbol of what was possible when people chose love over fear, acceptance over judgment. The Double M brand, burned into wood and hide across the territory, had taken on new meaning. It stood not just for McAllister, but for the marriage of different worlds, the melding of separate streams into one strong river. As Jacob carried his bride to their room, Lizzie whispered against his neck, "Thank you for seeing who I could be, not just who I was." "Thank you," he whispered back, "for teaching me that the best things in life come in unexpected packages." The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and eternal, blessing another love story written on the vast canvas of the American frontier, a story of redemption, acceptance, and the courage to build something new from the ashes of the past. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. If you're enjoying these tales of frontier romance, I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Leave a comment below and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more stories of love, adventure, and redemption in the American frontier. Share your thoughts about Jacob and Lizzie's journey. Did their love story touch your heart? What was your favorite moment? Your engagement means the world to us.